good afternoon. My name is Mike Melford, a UK SCA accredited strength and conditioning coach, and welcome to interview today with a very special guest. His name is Martindale, and he's the head of sports science at Gillingham Football Club. And Mark has almost been a kind of a mentor to me over the last couple of years, and he's helped me with my career progression into strength and conditioning. And I've got Mark on today just to cover off youth football strength and conditioning. Mark specifically works with the academy boys, and from ages from below 10 up to late teens. So it's great to have him today. And Mark, for those of you that don't know you like I do, if you want to give us a quick sort of brief intro into your job role with the Gills, how many years you've been doing it, and sort of like the ages and specifically that you tend to work with.
Yeah, so as Mike's been saying, I'm head of Gillingham Football Club, been doing the age range mainly through 16s all the way down to age 9 groups, 8-year-olds. Basically looking at the fundamental interventions, maturation, and obviously strength development over their age ranges over the time. We do significant testing, so I've been there and developing that over the past 10 years, probably going into 11, 12 years now for the season. And be recruiting different aspects. So we just recently got into a sprint coach, so we're getting more specific on that side of things. And we more fundamentally look at individual programs as well to build in certain developments of certain players that may have difficulties in certain areas. For example, if it even is a medical condition or growth condition that they may need support on over a period of time with their aspects, really, yeah.
That's great, Mark. And one thing else I just want to pick up on what you mentioned about the different like maturation and growth, and that's a big part of youth development, and it brings its own challenges alongside it. So just wanted to kind of get a kind of explanation from yourself about the different sort of stages of childhood growth, and everyone's got their own different view on this, but I mean, how do you see it generally when you the coaches at Gills kind of categorize the athletes?
Well, it's very difficult. It's probably across all sports, really, because you've got your biological age and chronicle age of your females or boys. So age ranges, we go from 8 to about 11 is fundamental, so usually junior. So anything lower than that, basically 9, 10, 11-year-olds, you've got fundamentals of their growth, and they're more or less considered as juniors, but some obviously develop early in maturation, and we have to monitor that. So we are to kind of distinguish groups of, if they are early developers, maybe a 10 or 11-year-old, which is quite early for a boy especially, we'll have to then maybe develop into more of an adult or adolescent program at that stage, but that has to be monitored through measurements and testing of that child. I mean, I'm going to talk to you later about that, of how it's easy for a parent to maybe monitor that and think, actually, I think my son or daughter is going through a maturation stage. So the chronicle age is different to that biological age. So that is a very tricky time, especially that at this day and age, young people are maturing quicker, majority of the time. So we do need to keep on it earlier. Obviously, adolescence, age where you've got 12 to 16-year-olds obviously going through that maturation stage, but some also still go through a slower or later process than an older age group. So then we've got to divide those groups. Okay, a 12-year-old might actually be developing like an 11-year-old or 10-year-old, nowhere near compared to his same age group, could be a 12-year-old, but going as a 15-year-old. I mean, it's a very rare case to be that dramatic, but it does and has happened. And if it isn't monitored properly, obviously injuries and development could be hindered due to that, really.
Yeah, and just again, obviously, you mentioned about obviously the individualization of, which I think is very important. And as a general sort of, do you find that girls hit that maturation a lot earlier than boys in general?
They do. Going through a few things and talking to a few, especially medicine of other football clubs that do with females more. Girls tend to go a lot earlier. So girls tend to look at more age. 8, 9 is their kind of category that is more popular again, where girls maybe mature early. Now, sometimes maturation is quite difficult for girls because people just assume that once the menstruation cycle happens, that they're starting puberty. Sometimes it's a little bit delayed with menstruation, but maturation of the girls could still be early. So development of breast could even happen before menstruation even occurs. I mean, it won't be maybe a month or two delayed, but you can maybe see that happen before the menstruations happen.
Okay.
Menstruation really happens because of the hormone release to release eggs and stuff is higher, and that's where it starts happening. But maturation of the hormone for breast is slightly different, with fatty tissues obviously developing, and that could be another indication where a parent might go, oh, okay, my daughter might be going through an early maturation spell, and then obviously looking at trying to monitor them a bit more closely, really.
Brilliant. And it's great, obviously, the different sort of categories. And so, regards to sort of like how you structure the strength and conditioning training focus at Gills with the different age groups or the different stages, I mean, is there certain fundamentals that you generally stick to when it comes to the actual training focus?
Yes, so we try to stick to a routine because obviously, as a psychological phase of the development, sticking routines and healthy structure for the athletes is obviously good. So we're saying with the younger age, it's getting that fundamentals of movement and strengthening of specific fundamental movements will develop them better rather than doing a kind of a vague or a random program for individuals. But as obviously, if you get a maturation that is kind of obscure for that age group, then obviously that can be enhanced for that kind of process. And with the older lot, then that's when you're kind of looking more where people, obviously probably what you've noticed is the misconceptions about resistance training or plyometrics that students, young athletes should be doing that because they're too young, when obviously they can do, as long as it's with supervision. So as long as it's got a good structure and a good implementation of what they need to do, then everything should be fine. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's perfect. I mean, there's always that misconception, like you mentioned, of those epiphyseal or growth
Yeah.
plates that that it's done stunting growth and kids, and I think that's always a concern for
Yeah.
parents when they hear the word strength and conditioning. Sometimes they associate that with, oh no, my child's going to be lifting heavy weights, and even down to what I've experienced watching shadowing yourself, it was really good to see teaching the basic sort of fundamentals of a child as young as 10 or 11, how to jump properly, how to land properly, how to change direction efficiently. And these are fundamentals that they need to have a successful football
Yeah, I
career.
think we'll say to parents sometimes, like, you're happy for your child to run around, climb a wall, jump over a wall, land a wall. But then when they come to obviously having weights in front, all of a sudden it's a bit scary. But it's no different if you're jumping or getting up a wall with doing pull-ups or anything like that, or even tricep dips or pushing yourself up, or muscle up even. It's all different muscle groups that they're using when they're doing recreational stuff. So why can't we do it in a obviously safer gym-specific place where they can get better supervision to be more efficient? And then that allows parents to actually think, oh yeah, true, that makes sense. And then it obviously gets that kind of scare factor out of that situation, and then obviously sees more developments happen quickly.
Yeah, and like I say, I mean, going on to the next part of the question, and injuries are unfortunately part and parcel of sport and are bound to happen. I think you can't avoid the fact that at some point in your career there's going to be a minor or major injury. I think that's just part of life. And what do you find that are quite common injury sites with young footballers? And are there different sites? Does it change as they get older?
Technically, not really. I mean, I guess the two factors of different injury you have most commonly, if you go from the range of 11 maybe to 13, stroke 14, again depending on maturation, is severs and osculitis in knees. They're the main two ones there. Usually, obviously through tightness of muscles and tendons of different muscle developments as they grow. Tends to be there, and then as they start getting older, it starts to become hamstrings and lower back. Seem to be the higher end of that. Now, the factors of that could be environmental, of their day-to-day life, obviously because they do a lot of schooling hours, and they sit down a lot, going home and they play on the Xbox or the PlayStation. Do they go out and overtrain because they made football for 2-3 hours with their mates and then go into train the next day? It's lots of different factors that's probably not measurable, but the main things or factors come down to usually the muscle flexibility that the players don't really monitor well, especially when they're growing. So tightness in calves, hamstrings, lower back seem to be the main concepts with that.
And do you see a difference at injury risk between male and female? Are girls at risk at certain more injuries than boys?
Now, the risks For muscle development, no, the risk isn't, but the joints, yes. So girls tend to have more hypermobility than boys in general, due to obviously their makeup of their biological makeup, really, of being female. But especially when they are going through the menstruation, their joints become more fluid, so they're more supple. And the most risk that can be is obviously dislocation or ligament over tail stretch or tendon tail stretch because of too much movement in their joints, because obviously the fluid in their joints is probably more than normal and what their muscles are used to, because it's only a week compared to 3 weeks of non-menstruation where it comes back to more normal hormone levels. So yeah, with the females, it becomes more joints based prevention, injury preventions that we try and I suppose as sports scientists will try and monitor to keep sure that they don't overload more than anything on there, and try and keep them obviously safe with their diets as well, because that will then obviously help control the rehabilitation of any injuries they have.
Yeah, and you know what? Actually, monitoring is such an important part, and just for the parents. I mean, as a parent myself, my son's at an age now where he's starting to become a lot more active with gymnastics and so on. So, for our parents out there who perhaps haven't got the background that we have and perhaps the knowledge, what advice could you give to them about, monitoring the volume of exercise that their child is doing, especially when they're looking to push towards the playing sport at a fairly high competitive level?
For parents, it's probably the best thing you do for your child is probably monitoring their maturation with measurements. When we have kids, obviously, me and you've got very similar age kids, you get the percentile chart. Now, we obviously, with hospitals, monitor that at a very young age, and then when they get to like 3, 4, we kind of step back from that and let obviously a child grow and not really monitor what that means after that. But with teenagers, that percentile chart is still there. So the World Health Organization, you can use their chart, goes up to the age of adulthood, and you can literally monitor. If you do it regularly, at least a monthly basis, you can monitor if your child is going abnormal or following the line of percentile where they should be, which gives you a great indication of what they can do. And that's just literally measuring your own child, which is nice, easy monitoring. And obviously, if they've jumped a line and gone into from, 60 to 70, 80 percentile, they've done a massive growth spurt. And then you maybe can check the weight and make sure that it's in line, because it could be just a weight or imbalance or anything like that. And the other one, which is quite hard to do, hard to get, which I could forward on to you, to be fair, is the peak height velocity calculator, which will get your child to know what estimate would be for adult height. So you'll know if they're at peak height velocity, and it will indicate that through the calculator that they're basically at a high maturation. And then they could use that as a tool to go, okay, my child's now going through a big maturation spell. The right halfway point, they can then obviously really monitor and support them, which basically be injury preventions.
Yeah. So would you say when they're going for that sort of growth spurt, would you then say, okay, well, this is a good time to maybe take advantage of the hormone change? Or would you say, well, I have to make sure that maybe focus a bit more on making sure that they maintain flexibility throughout this stage to support that growth?
Yeah, it's hard, but it is all of it. So it'd be definitely injury prevention, because as we know, bones will grow quicker than muscle and tendons. So you need to monitor that, and obviously stretching and strengthening that areas, not with massive weights, but at least just mobility would be fundamental. But also diet, they're going to want food more intake because they're using more energy through their systems, through that maturation spell. Water intake, dehydration is massive as well, hence where mood swings come in, and tiredness as well for the athletes when they're going through it. It's just a lot of energy using through. So a big aspect of trying to monitor and keep them aware of, am I eating enough? Am I keeping mobile enough for them to support their development, really? Because if it is left alone, tightness, fatigue comes much more dramatically compared to someone that's look after themselves as best as possible.
Brilliant, Mark. Mark, before we let you go, thank you for today. And it's been a good insight for myself personally to find out specifically for football, but also I think a lot of parents would have found that extremely useful. But before we go, I'd like to just ask you, in your words, obviously you've been a coach for a fair while now, and again, obviously I really enjoy shadowing yourself, but what do you feel makes a good coach? What attributes?
The care of it, really. I'm looking at the athletes and making sure you understand that everyone's individual and not a group. So if you've got a group of 15-year-olds, every one of those is individual. And if the coach can recognise that individuals have high attributes of certain areas and low attributes on others, and they can identify those, I think a good coach will then use that as a tool to go, okay, we'll develop the strengths, but also the weaknesses and areas that they may need to work on, which could be just injury prevention stuff, or developing a weak area that could make them a better athlete in the future. So yeah, individualising players and coaches, will identifying that's what I feel was a good coach in my eyes.
Good man. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add to?
I know there's some misconceptions with many parents may think, especially at older points, where taking supplements, so 15, 16-year-olds, that seem to be obviously higher maturation. Supplements we tend to stick away from at our football club until a much adult age, maybe 18, 20, purely because digestion isn't that efficient for the young athletes and not needed. Obviously, natural foods is best for anyone anyway, so we'll always go for that. And then maybe diet. So I'll also get a lot of questions of how much protein should my child have. And if they're at a high level, it tends to be 1 gram to 1.4 grams of protein per kilo of your child. So if they weigh 50 kilos, it goes to that. So just monitoring that. Sometimes parents feel ideal that that's a nice, easy tool to use.
Brilliant, excellent. That's a really good insightful today. Thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man with everything going on, and we look forward to hopefully catching up soon and digging into some other details there, buddy.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Nice one, Mark.
Bye.